So let's take a step back, I'll show you some reason, and then I'll show you how to make this simple contraption. Now to be clear, what I'm about to show you are ways that I've used this on the lathe. The KitchenAid sander works maybe even a little bit better because it has the slow speed settings, but the KitchenAid's going back in the kitchen after this video is done. I find myself going to this thing quite often when I have a small piece I don't want a full round over for. I just want to knock down some edges and clean up some faces. And also for times I'm working with end grain. End grain burns easy. Slow speed does not burn end grain nearly as easily, if at all. So I can still make aggressive cuts by using a lot of force without the risk of burning the end grain and without the risk of taking off more than I intended to. So this has definitely become my go-to tool for fine-tuning the bevels around the end grain area for those reasons. Oh, and this is great for sanding 3D prints because it's not gonna melt the print. Now I'm switching to a foam squishy interface pad, which takes us to another level. It allows the sandpaper to morph around convex surfaces. And I'm also switching from a paper-backed sandpaper to a mesh-backed Abranet sandpaper. I'll put a link in the description so you can read more about that. It's just really flexible, which is great for this. So as far as the copper goes, I'll clean up copper after brazing it. And I also use this to change the appearance of metals, to go from a gloss or a mirror finish to more of a matte or a brush finish. And different grits of sandpaper will produce different types of results. Now the edges press back nicely when sanding concave sort of curves. And this is another area where the Abranet sandpaper really shines because the paper is a little bit more rigid and will leave grooves around where the edges are sanding, but the Abranet sort of flexes out of the way nicely to not cause that problem. And these flexible edges are also useful for spoon making where the handle curves inward. It really makes sanding that far easier than anything else I found. And spoons. Spoons are what started this whole mess. Spoons present a lot of sanding challenges, and that's what led me to this solution here. Having a heavy sander that's slow and high torque, I can really jam the spoon up in there to get that sandpaper wrapped around the spoon to make the contours of the spoon flow from one part of the spoon to the next. Now there's not a whole lot involved with making this. There's some basic hardware, as well as a couple 3D printed parts. I'll have the list and the links in the description for the details, as well as the link to Thingiverse where you can download the model so you can print it. If you don't have access to a 3D printer, I think these things ought to be easy enough to make out of wood because you don't have to make them really, really precise. So the objective here is just to go from a square hole to something usable. And for that something usable, I chose a 1/4 inch by 20 TPI bolt, in particular a toilet bolt or router hardware bolt, T-bolt. 2 1/4 inches long. One dimension is already correct on that. Just need to sand off the 2 wings to make it square. Next, put on the spacer. Then after that, the core part that holds the 2 bearings. If you 3D printed it, pull out the supports, put the bearings in, put that on the bolt. Then follow up with a lock nut, tighten it almost all the way. If you tighten it too tight, then this thing won't spin much at all. So back it off just a little bit so that this thing can spin, but that there's not too much play in it. And speaking of play, I noticed that there was a little gap between the bearings and the threads, just super tiny. So I found that wrapping one layer of painter's tape fixed that nicely. For the sanding plate, take some 1/2 inch Baltic birch or MDF, cut a 5 inch by 5 inch square out of that. Mark the center point, punch it, then use a Forstner bit to drill a recess for the T-nut, then a regular bit to drill the hole for the remainder of it. Then go ahead and hammer in the T-nut. Well, now it's time to mount it to the mixer. Turn it on and go ahead and draw a circle that is a little bit less than 5 inches. Cut out that circle, true it up with a sander, and then you're ready to attach the Velcro. Now for that Velcro, I've just been using the 2 inch wide strips that are sticky on the back, and then the stickiness wears off, and then I super glue it back on, and then it pretty much doesn't give me any sort of trouble for a long time after that. But what I'd recommend instead is to get one of those rolls that's pretty wide and epoxy that on. So don't go with the sticky stuff, just go with the fabric stuff, and just epoxy that on once and for all. Then be sure to put on a nice thick foam interface pad and start.
Hold on. This started out as kind of a silly project, but this KitchenAid is a boss, and if I want any chance of using it again, I need to figure out how to keep dust off of this. That is one sheet of foam core board. Cost $1 at Dollar Tree. I did find Dollar Tree to have the best prices on this stuff. Now, if you do go to Dollar Tree and buy this based on my recommendation, I do ask that you'd use my affiliate barcode. I don't get rich off of this program, but every little bit helps.